And we are live, Senators.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions. I am Joe Benning, the chair of the committee. I represent Caledonia District. It is February the 1st of 2022. Committee members are Senator McCormick from Windsor County, Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, Senator Mazza from Colchester Grand Isle, and Senator Parent from Franklin County. We are discussing several things in the capital budget this afternoon, amongst which is Section 2, the statewide physical security enhancements. We have with us Marjorie Clark, the Supervisor in Security Systems at the Department of Buildings and General Services. Marjorie, I'm not sure if you've heard this speech before, but I give it every time we open up for the benefit of those who may be watching us on YouTube. It comes as a surprise to several of us that we actually do have an audience out there in YouTube land. We have no idea who they are. So for the benefit of anybody who may not be familiar with the committee process or government and how it works, maybe here watching for the first time to learn things about how we do things in institutions, you and I may be talking about something we're familiar with in the Capitol bill. All of a sudden, something you say might be red flagged in my eyes as something that needs an explanation for the benefit of the YouTube watchers. So if I interrupt your testimony, that may be exactly why that happens. I do understand that we sometimes speak with our own vernacular and acronyms. I'm going to try to avoid that as much as possible, just for the benefit of the listening audience. And I think you have been in front of committees before, am I correct? So the rest of this you should know, but I do ask you to begin by introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about you personally and your background on how you fit into this government picture. With that, Marjorie Clark, the floor is yours, and welcome to Senate Institutions.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Margie Clark. I am the supervisor of the Systems Integration Unit at Building and General Services, Office of Security. What system integration means to you is that we are responsible for doing the card access, camera systems, security systems, security infrastructure within state buildings, both owned and leased throughout the state. So from border to border. My team consists of myself and 2 technicians. We mainly rely on private contractors to do the actual installation of all the new security systems that we're installing, but we do maintain a majority of that infrastructure with our 2 specialized technicians that are on our team. So we have a
let me stop you right off. Does that mean that when I go to use my card, my swipe card at the gate, at the front gate of the parking lot, and it doesn't work, I have to call you and let you know that?
You got it.
Okay, make sure Alex has your cell phone number so I can make that call.
Absolutely. There's a couple layers before it gets to me, but yeah, at the end of the day, we can fix you up.
Great.
So how that ties into why I'm talking to you guys today is the legislature has been very accommodating to our needs for funding to put security infrastructure in state buildings. And we were faced with really trying to make sure our state employees feel safe while they're at work, so they can do the best job they can providing services to the public. Some of the client populations that state employees deal with generate threats and unsafe situations. So to mitigate those concerns, we first developed a matrix where we put different facilities in different buckets. We developed a threat level matrix, and we basically categorized buildings at a very high level from a threat level 0, which is probably like warehouses, salt sheds, things that really don't have any interaction with the public, all the way up to, that would be a 4, all the way up to a threat level 1, which would be critical infrastructure, correctional facilities, things like the Department of Health, bioterrorism wing, like things that should there be a vulnerability identified in that building, it could really create a large public safety concern. A majority of our buildings fall in a threat level 3, which is a very moderate interaction with public. Chances of dealing with hostile clients fairly low. And then we have a 2 and a 2+ threat level, which are, there's a higher probability of dealing with hostile behavior within those facilities, based both on data and sometimes even the location of the buildings. So we took that information of those threat levels, and then we said, well, what's a standard level of security that we should be putting in all of these buildings? And we developed, for a threat level 2+, we want to put in, a really hardened secure perimeter where we can separate the public out from where our employees' space is. We have things like client meeting rooms and reception windows, cameras, card access, alarm systems. And then it tiers down from there based on data. So we try to take a strategic approach, focus on buildings with the highest threat level first, and address those as funding allows. And we've been very successful over the last few years putting security infrastructure into those state buildings. Currently, we're at about 73% of all state facilities owned and leased have the appropriate level of security based on that matrix and the standards that we've developed. So that's a lot in a nutshell. I don't know if you, Senator, or any of your committee members have any questions about where we're at so far.
So far, committee, any questions? No, apparently you have kept them all occupied.
Excellent. So we come each year and we ask you for funding to keep going with this strategic plan of being able to put that infrastructure out in buildings. Like I mentioned, we've been very successful in putting those together. COVID, fortunately for us, hasn't created too many challenges for us. We've kept working through COVID to put security in the buildings and keep working on those projects. We're at a place now where sometimes when you're looking at the amount of funds that we're expending, it's not as much as when we first started this project, because we started with those higher threat levels, larger buildings like the major human service district offices, where it was more costly to put the infrastructure in those larger buildings. Because we've been able to accomplish that, we're now getting into those smaller buildings where, although it's a project that still uses all of our same amount of resources to manage a project and get people on board, the cost to actually run the cable and put in the devices is smaller. So we're doing more projects, but smaller projects at this point. We will continue to ask for funding for well into the future, because one of the things that we will be faced with, like with any technology, is those devices become end of life. And because we put in so much infrastructure all together a few years ago, those systems will all be coming end of life here in the next couple of years. So we'll need to constantly be prepared to go out and replace the devices that are failing and are out of warranty.
So are you able to tell us the itemized list of things that are currently up for discussion in the capital bill adjustment?
I mean, I'm prepared to discuss, like, we've asked for $250,000 each fiscal year to help go through. I can't itemize out each one of those projects of what it will cover, because until we get out to a building and actually do a security assessment, write a scope of work, get bids, we have, a very limited idea of how much each one of those projects will cost.
So the $250,000 that you're seeking is a general request to have a chunk of money set aside, and then you go out and discover exactly what needs to be redone.
Yes, Senator.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out whether there are some items that are untouchable with respect to that list, or whether there is some, I'll call it fluff room on the 250 if we are desperately searching for other funds. Is there any kind of project out there, and maybe Eric can help us here as well, that is an absolute must that has to be passed?
Eric, did you want to jump in on that, or did you want me to?
Flounder solo. Hi, Eric Philcorn, BGS. When you say a project, are you saying like delaying work on a building in her program, or are you saying let's not build something we were planning on building, or
I guess the intent of having you scheduled this afternoon was to try to identify what things are absolutely necessary at this point in time to give us an update on what's been happening with the security systems and making sure when the bill finally arrives on our table that we are up to speed with who's requesting what money and why. So that was the intent of this conversation.
Senator,
go ahead.
I think this program is more in the family of like major maintenance or door controls, where there's no end to the work that could be done. And this level of funding allows us to use the capacity of our team to make improvements. So, you know, when your card reader goes dead at the gate, or you need a new gate, or you know, all the security needs of all the buildings fold into this program, with a few except like in the correctional facilities, they have their own money for that, but we consult on that program. But just about everything else all her work is critical, and it's never done.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, when the commissioner was testifying last week, she was going through section 2 and then suddenly stopped and said that Marjorie probably ought to come in and identify things in her camp, so to speak. So Alex and I made a note to have Marjorie come in and try to flesh that out some. And I don't know whether there was any conversation with the commissioner about what specifically you might have been authorized to talk about or not authorized, or whether you were just left to flounder solo.
You could certainly talk about some of the projects that are on the conveyor belt for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to recognize that you know, we do have a targeted action plan. We do know, generally speaking, what buildings we want to go to. We appreciate having some funding there that gives us the flexibility to be able to change course when we need to. Threats are ever evolving and hard to predict at this point. So there's sometimes we may be headed in one direction, that we want to focus on a building or a geographic area, and then a significant threat occurs and we need to change course and be able to beef up security in something that we might have not even seen as a higher threat level until the data and the threat presented itself.
Is this an annual conversation that you have with respect to buildings and the status of their security?
Yes.
And at this point in time, the most recent one I can recall was Springfield having some needs, and I don't know where that project stands right now.
Yeah, we completed, actually, Springfield was one of the very first buildings that we dealt with. Again, looking at that threat level and the data that supported it. They have cameras, card access, alarm systems, panic buttons throughout the entire facility. I do want to caution how much I talk about specific security infrastructure in buildings in a public forum, just because I, want to make sure that we're keeping that tight as well.
Okay. Well, I did know that there were projects going on. I don't think we ever heard about whether projects had been completed. And I don't know if that's even saying that is a violation of where you want to go with the security issue.
No, I think that's fine. I can tell you, again, generally speaking, that we've touched every major AHS building, a human service building, with the exception of Bennington, which we have a project going on right now. That one's in process. Because there were armed sheriffs doing visitor screening for every person that comes in that building. We wanted to get the other buildings done first. But all of the major offices are done. A majority of our threat level 2+ are done. Erica is raising his hand. Maybe I'm floundering too much.
No, you're doing great. You're doing Senator Benning, may I interrogate the witness.
You want to interrogate the presenter? Okay.
I thought it might be helpful just to bring more light to this appropriation. And I know that things vary widely, but if you could just kind of give a sense of like when someone says, we need a card reader on that door. What is a card reader, a camera, some of the basic elements of your program that you deploy. What does it mean when someone says, Margie, get me a card reader?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe this would be a better context. So I'm actually delivering this testimony from Burlington right now because we had a security concern at a building that houses state employees. They were concerned about some client behavior that happened there, and they wanted us to come in and see what we could do to make them safer. So our security team goes in, we look at, an assessment, where are we at? And so in this building today, I've already determined that we're going to need to put in a reception window. We're going to need to put in some cameras so employees can see the parking lot before they leave the building to make sure that there's not any dangerous things that they could be walking into once they go out to their car, especially at night or by themselves. I'm looking at putting in panic buttons here, looking at putting in an intercom system so public can't just wander off the street into the building without at least being able to have some sort of screening at some point. So those are the types of things that we walk in and we look at, and it'll take me several meetings and several visits before I have an idea of how much it will cost to fix that problem. Then when we look at the cost, we look at, are we getting the most bang for our buck? Are we getting the safety? I don't want to just spend money to make people feel safe. We need to put the money in to actually make people be safe and prevent things from happening. So we then analyze what are we getting and what are we doing, and we pare it down or pare it up from there. But it's different in every single building and every single scenario.
So
Is that what you were looking for?
In each instance that you have to go through that, do you also suffer the lack of a supply chain for parts, getting labor?
Supply chain,
design?
yes. Yeah. Supply chain is becoming a problem now. We're working on exploring different products, getting some stock on the shelves so we can at least replace things when they when they break. Supply chain is becoming an issue, a newer issue in the last couple of months with cameras in particular. Contractors, we've been really fortunate to work with some really great Vermont companies who have been very accommodating to getting us and keep working on our projects. So I haven't run into too many labor issues. We have hiccups like everyone else when there's an exposure to COVID or a child out of school because of COVID or whatever, where we've had to stop and adjust. But we haven't run into any roadblocks with labor right now. As far as system design, that's done in-house. So it's our folks. And as long as we're healthy and still working, we've been able to work through it all.
Great. Mr. Philcorn, you're a witness, sir.
Senator, I'm very pleased with this witness, and I would just as soon yield my time to the chair.
Nice duck and cover, Eric. Really good. Marjorie, I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to let us know about by way of security enhancements. Any big projects coming up?
We've got several in the hopper right now. Bennington is a big one that we are working on currently. We're in the design phase of that. We're working on a few projects in Burlington right now. We are working every time we build a new building or we move. So we're working on the state police barracks in Berlin, and done system design and working on Ruffin, ready to get that one up and going here in the next couple of months. So we've been working on on that. And as soon as we have the capacity for a new project, we usually, as we're wrapping up one security project, I'm going down the list of state buildings, seeing which one needs the next amount of infrastructure. And we start the design process as the installation is wrapping up in other ones. At any given time, me and my technicians are managing 3 to 4 major projects at a time.
So I'm curious, when you develop this annual routine, where do you go with your report and how does it end up in the governor's proposed budget for the capital bill?
We've arrived at this $250,000 number as a very general number that allows us the flexibility to just move forward as we're plugging down through our strategic plan and changing course, as I mentioned, because that's about where our capacity is to manage that many projects at a time with contractors and with our in-house resources. If you gave me $1 million tomorrow, there's enough work out there that I could spend it. But I don't have the capacity on my team to spend $1 million in putting that infrastructure in a building in a year.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It does. Mr. Philcorn.
I'd answer it just a little bit more, Senator, in that pretty much every 2 years, really, when we do the governor's recommend, I go to Margie and I say, all right, is this still an appropriate amount? Are you still spending this much? Do you think you need a little more? Do you think you could do with a little less? And so we do actually look at the workflow in her department to formulate our request, but she's got it so well dialed in that it's pretty steady.
Okay. Margaret, appreciate you coming by this afternoon. I'll throw out the same invitation I do to everybody else. The House Committee on Corrections and Institutions technically has the capital bill until they're done with it. We don't really have a whole lot to say about it, but if they should screw something up over there on that side and you need something to be fixed, don't hesitate to reach back out. We'll see what we can do for you.
I appreciate that, Chair. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
Greg Mosley, we're going to shift a little bit and have a judiciary update. I see you're on the screen, Greg. Are you ready to go?
I am ready, yes.
Welcome back
Hi,
to
Greg.
Senate
Bye, Greg.
Institutions. You know all the routine about how to introduce yourself and all that because you've been here before. So welcome back, and the floor is yours to tell us about some ARPA Capital Fund project proposals.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to talk about this need. I am here, for the record, my name is Greg Mosley. I'm the Chief of Finance and Administration for the Vermont Judiciary. And I have been working with the assistant judges, who are the county executives, to assess the ventilation in the county courthouses. We have 12 county courthouses that are owned by the counties. And the judiciary is tenants in all of them. We don't own any buildings. So we play a tenant role, which means for this purpose, we don't really have the expertise in-house to deal with mechanical situations like HVAC systems. So we've been working with some contractors, and we've been doing assessments of these courthouses, and we've come up with a plan to bring them up to ASHRAE standards to make them safe so that they can operate on a normal basis. And I'm happy to go through our process, talk about that, and we can talk about the numbers and the funding request that we think meets the eligibility for the coronavirus capital projects funding, which is part of the ARPA funding.
We would be happy to have that list, and I may get around to asking you about specific courthouses in a little more detail.
Sure. So just some background and context for what brought us to this funding request. When the pandemic happened, we went around and were originally just working with BGS to assess our buildings and the safety of those buildings. And we realized a few months into the pandemic that, and we, like the rest of the world, we realized that ventilation was an important factor. And we also realized that many of the counties were not prepared to assess their ventilation systems. So we had received some coronavirus relief funding, or CRF, and we contracted with a mechanical engineer and a couple of facility project managers. And we went about the process of assessing each one of our 23 courthouses. And that took a while. They had to collect a bunch of information, look at design schematics. We even hired vendors to go in and check airflow to make sure that the systems were working as designed. And we ultimately came out with an assessment report on each building. And most of those allowed, with certain conditions, allowed for there to be in-person trials and hearings. Some of those did not. And generally what happened is, right now, out of the 23 courthouses, there's 15 of them that are open. They're allowed to have in-person hearings and in-person trials. There are COVID protocols in place, so we're limiting distancing, we are requiring masks, we are limiting the capacity in our courthouses, but they are still operational. There are 8 courthouses that are not fully operational. One of them is the Supreme Court. The doors are locked. That is the courthouse and the only one that is closed to the public. And that is not because of a ventilation concern, that's a security problem. We are loaning out our security to other courthouses. Then that leaves 7 courthouses that have been assessed and their ventilation is not up to standard or doesn't exist. 5 of those buildings have no mechanical ventilation at all. And those are the county buildings. Just for the record, they go across the Canadian border. So it's Grand Isle, Franklin, Orleans, Essex, and then Newfane down in Wyndham, the civil building. So we put out an RFP and we collected estimates from vendors on each of those new installations. And those numbers have been funneled into this funding request. And then for the other buildings, county buildings, that requires some more upgrades, more work, but they're already operational now, but they're better systems, UV lights, better filters, better controls. We've added those in too. So it's 12 county buildings. The total funding request is $5.7 million. And I wanted to just address some appropriation that was given last year, $800,000 for us to start the design work on those buildings. So the estimates for all 12 buildings actually come to about 6.5 million. And I've deducted the 800,000 that was already appropriated, which brings us to the $5.7 million request.
Can I just pause? I'm thinking back in time to when we understood there was $113 million out there that was supposed to be divided by the 3 branches of government. Is this request that you're making part of that 113?
Yes, the 113 is the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. We believe it's eligible for that. And so, yes, we are coming, and it's our only judiciary request since we don't own any other buildings. Senator
Parent.
Does this money help out the needs in Franklin and Grand Isle County with our courthouses? Those complete HVAC needs?
Yes, this would complete an installation of a new HVAC system in both those counties.
Okay, thank you.
So committee, just to bring you back up to speed, last year we had in the capital bill language that we were getting 113 million in ARPA funding. And initially the idea was to split it 3 ways. And at the very last minute, there was some contention that the proposal got kicked back, I believe, if my memory serves, from the appropriations committees, saying you can't split it 3 ways, everybody's got to make their own proposal. You might remember some frustration on my part that we were suddenly then faced with the possibility that each of the 3 branches of government would submit a proposal asking for the full amount. We're close to that point right now, and I know that this ask from Judiciary is only 5.7 million, but I do recall that the administration was asking for the 113, and the legislature has yet to kick in how much it wants. So we're bound to experience some rocky roads ahead as the capital bill gets to winding through the process. Greg, I interrupted you. I'm curious to know what other courthouses have yet been visited by way of contractors who are out there making actual proposals now?
Does the committee have the Excel spreadsheet that was submitted to the House Institutions Committee? That listed out all the numbers for each building and then had a summary page on it.
Alex, I don't know if you have that and were able to call it up.
I do. I can bring that up. One moment.
Okay. So as I mentioned, our process involved the mechanical engineer and our facilities project manager visiting each courthouse, assessing the airflow, writing up a report, and the 5 buildings that don't have HVAC now, where there's an entirely new installation required. We did the RFP process and the vendors had a walkthrough day. We worked with the assistant judges so everybody was aware of the process. That's one of the interesting pieces to this funding request is these are not state-owned buildings. These are county-owned buildings, but they do primarily operate as a courthouse. And so the state of Vermont and the Vermont Judiciary is very interested in getting these buildings back up to a usable format so we can have all of our courthouses fully operational again. I can see that you now see the summary page and it's broken down by county-owned courthouse. And as you scroll down there, those estimates for the first 4 buildings are for new installations between 500 and 700,000 per installation. And then as you work down that list, you see the other county buildings listed and where it's marked on the left as upgrade. That's where there is an existing system, but we are working to upgrade that in some way, either by making it easier to get in fresh air from the outside or some new controls to be able to control the flow of air so you can maximize the fresh air coming in depending on the temperature.
Alex, can you scroll that page?
You just want the bottom of the page?
I just want to scroll up some so I can see what's below.
I mentioned there were 12 county-owned buildings. Just for the record, the 2 counties that don't have county-owned courthouses are Addison and Caledonia. There's only 1 courthouse in those 2 counties and they're owned by the state of Vermont.
So Alex, I can just see the top of the Chittenden. It's like civil.
Oh, is it not? Oh, my screen share is bugged. Hold on one moment.
I need to see lower down too.
Yeah. So Greg, while we're staring at these new projects, am I safe in assuming that jury trials cannot recommence until these HVAC systems are put in place?
That's true. We have not found a way to bring in the right amount of people for a trial and ensure that it's a safe environment for everyone.
And when you say a safe environment, are we basing the safety call on COVID protocols?
We're trying to get ventilation to a standard. You may have heard this of the ASHRAE 62.1 standard, which defines the amount of air that could be exchanged per volume of the room and per number of people in the room. It's a square footage, it's a cubic feet per minute measurement. So we're trying to get everything up to that standard that would protect the people inside in a pandemic like this.
I'm trying to figure out who has made the connection between the ASHRAE standard and the word safety. And the reason that I'm asking is that we were running through the same series of questions in reopening the State House. Somebody somewhere has determined that safety equals the ASHRAE standard. And I'm trying to figure out who has made that call.
Okay. Well, I can tell you what happened with our process in the judiciary. We contracted with the mechanical engineers, engineering services of Vermont. And the first question was, on what basis will we measure the safety of these buildings? And so we weren't really sure. And the only entity that I'm aware of that's come out with a pandemic standard is ASHRAE. It's the trade association for heating and air conditioning and refrigeration. And they did come out with a standard. They had a standard before the pandemic. They modified it after the pandemic started. And as to my knowledge, and I am not an engineer, it's the only standard that's out there. There's not anything else that has measured this or established some standard that would make buildings safer in a pandemic. I do know that the CDC has come out with a recommendation to change filters to a MERV 13 filter, I believe it is, and we've done that. But in terms of the airflow, ASHRAE is the only standard I'm aware of.
But the courts, in your understanding, have definitely connected the ASHRAE standard to the door opening of safety. I didn't articulate that very well. You've made the connection that ASHRAE standards must be reached in order to open the doors to normal trial activity. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, a normal trial activity. We're still not at normal trial activity. We are having trials, but it's not normal. We are limiting the number of people. For a jury trial, we've determined that about 28 people you need in a courtroom to have a trial. But we're doing as much as we can remotely. We're distancing, we're masking, we're limiting the amount of time in a room. We're using CO2 monitors. So it is much different, even if it is in person. There are still protocols in place.
Another question involves the decision to leave it up to the judges individually in each courthouse as to whether or not they're going to resume jury trials. Are you connected with that conversation?
I'm aware of it, but that was made by the Supreme Court and the Chief Superior Judge and the judges. So I didn't weigh in on that at all. But I do know that many of our protocols, we started trying to adopt statewide protocols from Montpelier, and quickly realized that each building is its own unique entity. And it's really difficult to measure what's happening in a community or in a building when and try and apply that consistently to every building. There are some courthouses that have very large courtrooms and others that have very small. There are some of these courtrooms that have great HVAC systems and others that have HVAC but aren't very functional. And then of course there's some that aren't that don't have mechanical ventilation at all. So applying a unique standard across all of those was too difficult. We decided to go with local control and give that to the judges.
So much different than the state of New Hampshire. I don't know if you're familiar with them, that they've made this decision on a statewide basis.
They did for a while. I don't know if they've changed that yet. They were pretty much closed for the month of January.
Okay. I've interrupted you.
I'm ready to go through these numbers or talk about individual courthouses if the committee would like.
I would like that, actually.
Okay.
And committee, bear with me because this is a much larger discussion that I'm also involved in.
So I can just kind of pick up where I left off. I think I talked about the new installs that were above the screen there. And then as you scroll down, you see Chittenden and Lamoille are two of our bigger buildings with better HVACs. And so there's minimal work there. We're installing some HEPA filtration and some UV lights that will help to clean the air as it's ventilating the buildings. And then you get down to some existing buildings that are still quite pricey. The Washington Civil Building, it's not considered a new install, it's an upgrade, but it's the closest thing to a new install. They have an old air conditioning system that serves only the courthouse, the courtroom. And so as an air conditioning unit, it did have a motor in there pushing air and it had some ductwork, but it doesn't take in fresh air from the outside and it doesn't heat that. So And in Washington's case, the motor itself is reaching its end of life. So there's going to be a lot of replacement parts in that courthouse. Just scrolling down the list, Rutland is a unique building. They have a courtroom in the basement, and the basement is actually ventilated. So the tougher part is getting ventilation to the first floor. Many of these courthouses have the same type of design where the first floor is offices. Mainly it's judicial staff, could be some county offices. That's generally where the public might go and meet in case manager rooms. And then the second floor is the courtroom with the ancillary parts. It might have a jury deliberation room in the back, some rooms out front for the attorney-client rooms. And for the most part, these buildings put in ventilation only to the courtroom. Sometimes it was only designed as air conditioning units. So there's no ventilation to the first floor. And in many of these buildings, we can install units in the basement and just vent that up through the floor. It minimizes the disruption of ductwork going through the building. But in Rutland, we can't do that. There might be a small mechanical room where we can put in some of the mechanical fan, but the ductwork is going to be harder to get through the building. So that particular building has a lot of carpentry work built into it. The Windsor Civil Building in Woodstock, actually that has a pretty good ventilation system. It was installed around 2014 or 15. This Woodstock courthouse was the first one that we approved for in-person activity way back in 2020. The problem is, again, it's a system that only serves the courtroom. So the ancillary parts of the courthouse that we need, like a jury deliberation room, attorney-client rooms, those aren't ventilated. Right now, they're operating only with HEPAs. And in fact, the jury deliberation room, because of the size of the room and the number of people you get in it, the HEPA filters really can't support that. So in Woodstock, we're using the courtroom as the jury deliberation room, and everybody else in the trial has to leave the room when the jury goes to deliberate. So the cost here would be to put the ventilation in the other parts of the building. So the other parts on the second floor and the entire first floor. I'm going to pause because I see a hand up.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Senator McCormick.
Thanks. I'm going to be parochial here. I represent Windsor County. That's the old courthouse in the Shire town, Woodstock. But we also have a courthouse in White River Junction, which I believe has problems. What's being done with that?
So we have two state-owned buildings that have problems. The Windsor Criminal Courthouse in White River Junction and the Orleans Criminal Courthouse, the Orleans Criminal Courthouse in Newport. Those are operated by BGS, so they have ultimate responsibility for the system. They've been determined to be insufficient for a variety of reasons. Generally, they're both older systems. The Windsor Criminal Courthouse was already on BGS's wish list for the capital budget because their systems there are nearing their end of life. So they were already kind of a known entity. And of course, up in Orleans, you may have heard there's a project to move into a new courthouse somewhere else. And so both of these buildings were known to BGS and to the judiciary as problematic. We have temporary solutions in place, or being worked on. In Orleans, we're trying to install ventilation to the jury room and the second courtroom to make that building more operationally efficient. And we are holding trials there. There was just a trial that started in January there. So it's not stopping us in Orleans. But in Windsor, the control system for the ventilation is substandard. It's really not helpful. And so the short-term solution there is to put what's called an HRU unit, or a heat recovery unit, and vent it, I think, through the windows to get into the courtrooms. And we believe that we can get that done probably end of March, early April. And at that point, we're hoping that the Windsor Criminal Courthouse will be open for trials this summer.
Right now, you're not using them, right?
It's what we call limited capacity,
Easy.
which means people can come in, they go through screening, they can go to the windows to conduct business at the clerk's windows, but we're not having in-person hearings and we're not having trials.
Yeah, so they're just not happening. It's not like they're happening someplace else. They're
Well,
just not happening.
no, well, they are happening someplace else. So some trials are being moved over to Woodstock, and some of the criminal trials are being moved down to Wyndham and are being heard in the Brattleboro courthouse.
All right.
So that will have to continue for about 3 more months, and then hopefully we'll get the Windsor Criminal Court open again.
Thank you.
That work for those 2 state-owned buildings or in Orleans and Windsor are not part of this funding project. These are just the county buildings.
Okay.
No, I'm
Just-
good. Thank you. Thank you.
And just one more note on the Wyndham Civil Courthouse in Newfane. We are working on that. That's a new install. There's no ventilation system. So that's part of this ask. And we've been working with the assistant judges. They have found what they think is an alternate location. And we are working with them to assess the mechanical systems in that location. That would be a temporary move of the courthouse while we were waiting for an HVAC system to be installed in the Newfane building. And so this all adds up to just under $6.5 million. I've deducted the $800,000 that we were already appropriated. So the funding request is $5.7 million.
Craig, just out of curiosity, if you were to be given this money today and a magic brush could be thrown all that change into your bucket, how long would these projects take to complete?
So we're already starting on the design work for the new installs. That's what we're using the $800,000 for. And after construction can begin, we think that it'll be about 15 months before they're substantially complete, which means that we have to plan on going through at least 1 more winter as is. But by the second winter, we should have all these buildings ready to go and operational. And I should point out that it's not just the ventilation that will be upgraded. Many of these old buildings have an electrical system that is maxed out, and that work is built in here for upgrades. So we're expecting there to be electrical issues. We're planning for an architect in many of these cases where equipment will be put up into an attic to get a structural engineer to make sure that the support of the joists is sufficient. Usually that includes vibration monitoring as well. Historic preservation will have to go through and approve all of this because many of these buildings are deemed historic. And of course, the fire marshal will come through. So it's a great opportunity to invest in these very historic and beautiful buildings. And it'll make these buildings very usable for the foreseeable future for the courts, and will ensure that justice can be delivered in those counties for a while, regardless of the pandemic.
It will be a happy day, but in the meantime, I've got clients sitting in jail waiting to get their trials heard, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, now that Orleans is operational with their first trial, that leaves Essex and Grand Isle as the only 2 counties where we don't have an operational courthouse. Orleans was backed up, of course, until just recently. And Windsor has to deal with a lot of change of venue and other issues to get their trials heard.
Well, Orleans is back on the stall list again because their trial judge came down with COVID yesterday. They had to stop a trial in the middle of it and declare a mistrial as a result. So I'm afraid we're still got obstacles in front of us, but I appreciate your coming by to give us all this info. Anything else you want to tell us about this project?
Just that I just wanted to emphasize that, again, we are the tenants in these buildings. We don't own them. So the assistant judges, who are the county executives, do have final say over what will happen to these buildings. We've been working with them. They're aware of the funding request. And while the judiciary would have contractual project managers overseeing this work, the assistant judges will be involved at the decision-making points.
Does that include the discussion over whether trials should be resumed construction or not?
No, I think that has been, whether trials will resume or not, or under what conditions they will, is a decision for the Supreme Court. The facility decisions of what gets changed, what needs to be upgraded, that's where we've communicated with the assistant judges.
Okay. Any other questions, committee? Greg, I assume I'm sorry, Senator Mazza.
Well, I think it's bring it to a head once and for all. It's been neglected for many years and it's time to bring it up. And I don't know how we're going to avoid it because it's sooner or later, somebody's got to bite the bullet, do it. And I think it's perfect time. It's an issue all over the states, not just one county. Everybody's having some issues. So good time to move ahead, I think.
I take it you're willing to take the 5.7 million away from the administration and get this project accomplished?
Hey, if it helps the whole state, let's do it.
Okay, I think that's going to be part of our conversation moving forward, and I would
Okay.
totally agree. Getting this
We'll learn
branch
the
of
other side.
government reopened fully is a real high priority right now.
We'll listen to the administration side and see what happens.
Yeah. Okay. Greg, thank you very much for coming by. I'm sure we're going to see you again.
Thank you very much, committee. I appreciate the opportunity.
I am cognizant that we may be losing some committee players at the 3 o'clock mark, so I'm going to keep moving forward. I do not see Commissioner Fitch.
Sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt, Senator.
Yes,
Commissioner
sir.
Fitch is held up in Senate Appropriations, but we do have David Sheets here to move his testimony up.
I think it's better to put the 7 million here, Mr. Chair, than put it into the state state house. Yeah, I think that would be a lot better. At least this whole state gets benefit. Just a thought for you.
I appreciate you delivering that message right as we introduce the state curator.
Well, there you go. He loves the
Timing is
bill.
everything.
He doesn't want to see it changed.
David, I'm not sure if you've been here since I've begun this little speech about folks actually listening to us on YouTube. But much to our surprise, we have actually found we have an audience on YouTube. What we don't know is their demographics. And so I have to assume that they are folks who may not have ever been involved in these kinds of committee discussions before, are learning things about all of our subjects for the first time. And so with each witness who comes in to testify, I ask to give first a little bit about yourself and how you fit into the process. And then we'll start asking questions or let you go on your testimony with whatever subject you happen to be talking about. But should you and I start talking to each other in a vernacular that you and I understand, but it red flags for me the possibility that somebody out there in YouTube land does not understand, I may interrupt your testimony. It's not to be rude, but just to let everybody get onto the same page before we continue the conversation. With that being said, I have you marked down as talking about the Exhibition Interpretation, Design, and Construction program for the State House. I am aware that there is a bill afoot out there that might curtail some of the responsibilities normally held by your staff. And I have not gotten that bill yet, but I'm aware of a conversation. I don't know whether you were intending to say anything about it today. If not, that's fine. We'll have you back if we ever do get the bill. But I want to let you know that there are conversations taking place that may require us to invite you back again to flesh out your end of things, and that's always important. Having said all that, welcome back to Senate Institutions, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Senator. And yes, I'm aware of the bill. We've been in conversation with GovOps about it, and I think I'll leave it there. We'll see what emerges for your contemplation further on in the process. In terms of this line item in the governor's proposed capital bill, budget adjustment. We're talking about a modest amount of money to be appropriated for following through with the charge that was given my office by a previous capital bill to create an interpretive plan for the State House. And that interpretive plan is, we're basically right smack in the middle of that process. We hope to have it completed by July of this year. We're working with Gretchen Soren, who is our consultant. Gretchen is the director of the Cooperstown Museum graduate program over in Cooperstown, New York. She's fabulous. We are really very, very fortunate to have her working with us on the plan. And basically, this is a line item to provide design and construction of exhibits that would be a part of that plan. So it's a little hard for me to know what those exhibit topics would be, but the central narrative that we are developing for the storytelling in the State House, which is part of the interpretive plan, not surprisingly, is the story of Vermont's state government and how particularly the institution of the legislature enables all Vermonters to access their government, to participate in their government. And so it is a story very much of how democracy took root in Vermont and how democracy has played out for centuries in our State House, as well as the two previous buildings. So we're going to be telling that story in a variety of ways, not just through exhibiting. And I think that's the tricky thing, is figuring out who the various audiences are at the State House. And once that part of the plan is developed, how you reach those audiences most effectively. And an exhibit is one way, publications are another, digital devices are yet another. So there are many ways of reaching audiences, and what we will be doing is trying to decide how to deliver the storytelling. And that's the third part of our plan, developing the stories themselves and then delivering the stories through the various means at our disposal. The State House has had a contract for a number of years with Shadows and Light, which is an exhibit design firm located over in the Burlington area. And with some of the panels that you've seen in the building are direct results of our collaboration with Shadows and Light. For example, the cases upstairs, the former flag cases, and the exhibits about Vermont in the Civil War that were developed to coincide with the Civil War sesquicentennial a number of years ago. We also developed more interpretation in the Cedar Creek room along the same lines. Downstairs in the main lobby, we now have a couple panels that talk about the State House in general for an audience that we were keenly aware was focusing on the building during the time that the statue came off the top, and we were developing a new statue for the dome and working on the dome. So we're currently working with that same design firm on an interpretive panel that is about to be installed, we hope, in the next month, directly beneath the portrait of Admiral Charles Clark in the main lobby. But Admiral Clark is to be relocated elsewhere in the building because his location is where we anticipate hanging a newly completed portrait of Alexander Twilight, the first African-American legislator in America, elected in 1836 to the Vermont General Assembly from his town of Brownington. And that portrait is going to change very much the storytelling that occurs in the main lobby, along with the presidents of the United States from Vermont, who are also located there. Admiral Dewey, for now, will remain where he is. And we're telling the story, too, of the 3 state houses for an audience of people who don't have the benefit of guided tours, because guided tours have long been the means by which we have done a lot of our storytelling. And during the pandemic, not so much. So we're keenly aware that depending on what's going on, depending on what season the State House is in, the legislative season, the tourist season, the school tour season, our audiences are very different at different times of the year. And we are one of those museums that has to be prepared to meet the public where they are at any given point, because they might be in the building for purposes other than simply visiting the State House as a tourist. If that's the case, we need to be prepared to give them the information they seek, but not to overburden them with an experience that might not suit the occasion, meaning Vermonters who are actively engaged in the lawmaking process in the State House itself, and yet find themselves in a room where they're kind of curious about what they see in front of them. So we have to be prepared to tell those stories as easily and with as much accessibility as we possibly can, so that all Vermonters feel that the building is welcoming, is their building, and that the process that is going on in that building is very much a process that they can participate in easily. We want that to be the first experience of any Vermonter who comes into the building at any time during the year.
So it would be helpful then to have a person who knows a lot about the State House and who loves to give tours in the corner office on the West Wing when they first walk in the door, right? Another story for another day. I wanted to pause, however, and say I'm sure that Senator McCormick is jumping up and down for joy because one of those 2 large military portraits in the main foyer is being taken down. I've been waiting, Dick, for you to raise your hand and then exclaim something, but I hadn't heard. Senator McCormick.
I certainly don't object to us honoring military heroes who come from Vermont. The problem that I've seen is that if one comes into the central lobby of the Vermont State House, actually after having come up the steps, they get the impression that the central defining moment in the entire history of the state of Vermont is the Battle of Manila Bay. We've got the cannon out front, and then we've got the admirals, and Vermont has done other stuff besides that. And also, frankly, our conquest of the Philippines and our suppression of the struggle for freedom afterwards was not our finest hour. And it happened. It was real. They were Vermonters. They did their duty. They deserve a portrait someplace in the State House. But we have a shrine to the conquest of the Philippines. So that's Vermont. That's the central moment of Vermont history. And so I'm glad it's being put into a bit more of a perspective. Thanks.
Well, at least the cannon from Bennington is pointed at the Department of Motor Vehicles office, so you can at least make some explanation.
Well, isn't that
Wait, no,
Admiral Dewey's old
the
house?
cannon from Bennington is fine. I'm talking about the big cannons from
Well, I
Manila
know.
Bay out on the lawn,
No,
which kids love to play on. They think it's a playground toy.
Watch
Right.
how you talk about motor vehicles. You get your license there.
yeah. David, I'm curious. This committee collectively has not been in the building for, well, it's got to be at least a year now. And
Yeah.
some of them may not have been in the building at all. I'm curious as to what's going on in there right now, and how are you feeling about what you're surrounded by?
Thank you, Senator. Your sensitivity to my sensitivity is very appreciated. It is a hard time for a curator such as me, who's been around long enough to have seen the building transformed into something that I have always considered beautiful. And right now, the State House is a little less than that. However, my close colleagues, the Sergeant at Arms and others, Kevin, your IT guy, Kevin, turns out to be a history lover, I might add. And so I am comforted by my colleagues who seem to understand that I might have a hard time with a lot of this, but I also see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm trying to keep myself focused on things that matter long-term rather than things that don't matter short-term. So, but thank you. The State House, I'm hoping, will look a little better once the Senate returns. I feel confident. And I will say this about the interpretive plan and about the exhibits to come. I started at the State House back in 1979 as a research assistant initially, and 5 years later as its first curator. And my work, as I think you know, Senator, because you served on the committee that talked about this through the summer and the fall, my work now is to ensure there's another curator and to set that person up for success at a time where we're looking at the State House with completely new eyes. In other words, it's less about preservation, and now it's about that storytelling. And it's storytelling at a time when all Americans are possibly a little more attuned to what history actually is. And the study of history and our government has never been more important than it is now. And I am grateful that I lived long enough to see preservation morph into the educational exercise that we need to have at the center of what the State House should be today. A building that resonates with true history, history that takes all Americans and all Vermonters into account, and tells the stories that connect all of those people to their State House. And I appreciate what you're saying, Senator, about your audience on YouTube, because you're very tuned in to the fact that people are paying attention in some cases for the first time because of the technology that is suddenly making it a little easier to be connected, to be educated, and so forth. So I think we're wanting to work with you and with our close colleagues like the Sergeant at Arms and others to make sure that that is as easy and for all audiences. And that's a complicated thing, but I feel incredibly grateful that I get the chance to do this before I retire. And it makes the whole exercise so much more worth it to me.
I appreciate the education, and I've learned something today that I did not know. Our IT guy, Kevin Moore, is actually a history nut. And that probably explains why the Senate chamber looks an awful lot like the flight deck of the Starship Enterprise right now. Now it makes sense. It does make sense. And it pains me to say that because to me, the entire series involving the Starship Enterprise doesn't seem like history to me, but I guess it is now.
He's a history buff. He's not your kind of history buff.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We got Mr. Spock down below. I want to say that I think everyone who has anything to do with the State House knows how important a service David Sheets has provided. But I have the honor of serving on the Friends of the State House Curatorial Committee. And so I've gotten to see that up close and in detail. And I really do thank you, David, for everything. I must say, however, committee chairs do get to choose their own artwork. And when I chaired Natural Resources, I made a simple request for dogs playing poker. And the curator refused.
Was it on?
No, I said if he couldn't do that, I wanted Elvis Presley on black velvet, and he wouldn't do that either.
I'm sorry, Dick. I know I failed you, and I'll try to make it up to you.
Thank you. I'm not walking out on you. I have to testify on a bill in another committee.
Sure.
Sounds like the former pro tem's office.
Oh, yeah.
That was another. Did you have anything to do with the pro tem's office at that moment in time?
I certainly did. I hope you know that nothing occurs in the State House without my participation. Now, I hasten to add that I did nothing more than cooperate. When the pro tem turned his gaze toward the lieutenant governor's office, you can appreciate this, Senator. I made it abundantly clear to him that the pro tem's office was one thing and the lieutenant governor's office was quite another, and that he could not count on my cooperation there.
Yes, I still think that his chief sidekick there, Peter, probably has been in several months worth of therapy since that the experience of living in that office for a while. Any other comments or questions, committee? David, appreciate you coming by. I'm sure we're going to have you back again as the capital bill comes our way. And if there are things in there that you really feel like you need to have tweaked to some extent, don't hesitate to reach out and we'll pick up the conversation.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming by. Committee, I have, let's see, Commissioner Fitch is due up next. Are we still missing Commissioner Fitch? Because I know we have some folks on the committee that may not be able to last the entire afternoon.
So Commissioner Fitch is still in Senate Appropriations. I believe she'll be available at 3.
Okay.
Is that the witching hour?
Well, I'm trying to decide whether we should be waiting out for that or we should call it an afternoon at this stage. Committee, what do you want to do?
Call it an afternoon at this stage.
That seems
Just
to be.
agreed with Mazza too much this year. No more. I agree with him.
All right, we're going to invite.
But you
Commissioner
turned liberal, so I can't talk to you now. God.
We're going to, I think Alex will call it an afternoon and invite Commissioner Fitch back to finish her presentation on the budget adjustments. Unless anybody else has anything of major importance. Dick Mazza, don't forget we have a chairs meeting